My sister caused my accident that left me paralyzed. Now she's posting engagement photos with my fiancé at the restaurant where he proposed to me. That's when I finally realized. The accident happened on a rainy Tuesday night when Amber insisted on driving, because I'd worked a 12-hour day and looked exhausted. She was always protective like that. My younger sister who worried about everyone else before herself. The other driver ran the stop sign, but hit my side because Amber had swerved trying to protect herself instinctively, she said. Anyone would have done the same, the police agreed. No charges filed. Just bad luck and wet roads. My spine was severed at T6, complete paralysis from the chest down. Amber escaped with whiplash and guilt that made her sob every time she saw me in the hospital. She quit her waitressing job to take care of me, moved into the apartment I shared with my fiancé Luke because I needed round-the-clock help. She slept on the couch for 3 months, refusing to take the guest room because she didn't deserve comfort after what happened. Luke was grateful for her help since his consulting job required travel and he couldn't be there all the time. They developed a routine. Amber would get me ready in the mornings, drive me to physical therapy, pick up prescriptions, make meals. Luke would take evenings when he was home. They'd tag team on weekends. They both looked exhausted and I felt guilty for ruining their lives. After 6 months, Luke started traveling more. Said we needed the money for medical bills. Amber would stay up late waiting for his calls to update him about my progress. They'd whisper in the kitchen about treatment options and wheelchair-accessible apartments and whether I was getting depressed. They were bonding over taking care of me, and I was grateful they had each other for support. When Luke forgot my birthday, Amber baked my favorite cake and tried to make it special. When he missed our anniversary dinner because of a client emergency, she watched our movie with me instead. She was trying so hard to fill the gaps he was leaving. I didn't blame him for pulling away. Who wants to marry someone who can't walk? By month 10, Luke said we needed to talk. He couldn't do this anymore. He loved me, but not like this. Not with tubes and catheters and a wheelchair that didn't fit in his sports car. He moved out, but kept paying his half of the rent for 3 more months, which felt generous. Amber held me while I cried. Said he was weak and I deserved better. Said she'd never leave me. She took over his half of the rent working double shifts. Started bringing home flowers every Friday like he used to. Cooked his recipes because she knew I missed them. She was being the kindest sister anyone could ask for. A year after the accident, I saw them together at a coffee shop through the window of my medical transport van. They were laughing over something on Luke's phone. Amber touched his hand. He didn't pull away. When I confronted her that night, she broke down. Said it wasn't supposed to happen. They'd been grieving together and trauma bonded. She'd tried to stop it, but feelings developed. She was so sorry. So incredibly sorry. She moved out the next week saying it was best for everyone. Luke helped her find an apartment. Then they started dating officially. Posted about finding love in unexpected places. About how sometimes the worst things lead to the best things. About being grateful for second chances. My parents said I should be happy they found comfort together. That holding on to anger would only hurt me. That Amber deserved love too. Yesterday I was cleaning out a closet when I found Amber's old journal from before the accident. She'd left it behind when she moved. I wasn't going to read it, but a photo fell out. Me and Luke at his company party. Amber had drawn hearts around Luke's face and written "someday" at the bottom. I kept reading. Page after page about Luke. How unfair it was that I had everything. The perfect job, the perfect man, the perfect life while she served coffee to rude customers. How Luke deserved someone who could really appreciate him. How I took him for granted. The entry from the day before the accident made my blood freeze. Tomorrow changes everything. I'll be driving. I've checked the intersection 3 times. That stop sign is barely visible in the rain. If I time it right, swerve at the last second, I'll be fine. She won't. Luke will need someone. I'll be there. I'll be perfect. I'll be everything she was, and more. I sit there staring at those words until my eyes hurt from not blinking. My hands start shaking so bad the journal pages rattle and I almost drop it twice before I manage to set it down in my lap. My chest feels tight like someone wrapped steel bands around my ribs and keeps tightening them. I can't get enough air. My vision goes spotty around the edges and I realize I'm having a full panic attack, something I haven't experienced since the first weeks after the accident, when I understood my legs would never work again. The truth keeps hitting me in waves. Amber planned this. She checked that intersection 3 times. She timed the rain. She drove that night knowing exactly what would happen. She looked at me that morning and decided today was the day she would destroy my spine and take my life. I read the entry again. And again. The words don't change. Tomorrow changes everything. I'll be driving. If I time it right, swerve at the last second, I'll be fine. She won't. My phone sits on the armrest of my wheelchair and I grab it with trembling fingers. I need to document this before I lose my nerve or convince myself I'm reading it wrong. I open the camera app and start photographing every page, forcing my shaking hands steady enough to keep the images clear. I photograph the entry about Luke being too good for me. The entry about how I took him for granted. The entry where she wrote that I had everything and she had nothing. I photograph the page with our photo, with those hearts drawn around Luke's face and that single word "someday" written at the bottom, like a promise she made to herself. My whole body feels numb except for my heart, which pounds so hard I can feel it in my throat. I'm documenting evidence of my sister's plan to disable or kill me. The words look insane even as I think them, but they're right here in her handwriting. I photographed the entries about her watching him at work, about learning his schedule, about all the times she showed up at places where she knew he'd be. I get to the entry from the day before the accident and take 3 photos to make sure I capture every word clearly. Then I go back through the journal and photograph anything else that shows her obsession, her planning, her calculated patience. My phone storage fills up fast, but I keep going until I've documented every single page I need to call someone, but everyone I know is connected to Amber or my family. My parents think she's a saint for taking care of me. My old friends drifted away after the accident. Luke is with her now. The only person I can think of who has no connection to this whole mess is Lucy, my physical therapist. She's been working with me for 8 months, and she's always been kind without being pitying. I pull up her contact and my finger hovers over the call button. It's almost 9 at night. This is way outside normal boundaries, but I press call anyway because I don't know what else to do. She answers on the 3rd ring. I try to speak, but nothing comes out except a weird gasping sound. I force myself to breathe and try again. The words come out broken and wrong, but I manage to tell her I need help, and it's an emergency, and I'm sorry for calling so late, but I don't know who else to trust. Lucy doesn't ask questions. She tells me to stay where I am, and she'll be there in 30 minutes. I hang up and sit there holding the journal in my lap, staring at Amber's handwriting, the same handwriting that was on all those birthday cards, and thank you notes, and the little encouraging messages she'd leave on my bathroom mirror during the worst days of my recovery. She wrote those messages with the same hand that wrote about planning to destroy my spine. 28 minutes later, I hear knocking on my door. I wheel over and let Lucy in. She takes one look at my face and comes inside quickly, closing the door behind her. She crouches down next to my wheelchair so we're at eye level and asks what happened. I hand her the journal with shaking hands and point to the entry from the day before the accident. I watch her face as she reads. At first she looks confused, her eyebrows pulling together as she tries to understand what she's seeing. Then her expression changes. Her eyes go wide. Her mouth opens slightly. The color drains from her face as the meaning of those words sinks in. She looks up at me and I see the horror in her eyes as she understands what Amber did. Lucy reads the entry again, then flips back through other pages I point to. She reads about the obsession with Luke, the resentment toward me, the careful planning. When she finally looks up again, she's shaking her head slowly like she can't quite believe what she's reading, but she knows it's real. She helps me think through the shock because my brain feels frozen. She points out that I need to preserve this evidence before Amber realizes the journal is missing. We need to make copies. We need to store the photos somewhere safe. We need passwords Amber doesn't know. Lucy gets my laptop and we spend the next hour uploading the photos to 3 different cloud accounts. We use passwords that have nothing to do with my life or family or anything Amber might guess. Lucy makes me write down the passwords on a piece of paper, and she takes a photo of that paper with her own phone. Then we make physical copies using my printer, and Lucy says she'll keep a set at her place. By the time we're done, it's after 11 and I'm exhausted but too wired to even think about sleep. Lucy asks if I want to stay at her place tonight. She has an accessible ground floor apartment and a spare room. I realize I can't stay here. This is the apartment Amber found for me. The place she's been paying half the rent on out of guilt she never actually felt. Every piece of furniture, every accessible modification, all of it was chosen by the person who deliberately put me in this wheelchair. I tell Lucy yes. We pack a bag with my medications and supplies and clothes for tomorrow. Lucy loads everything into her car and helps me transfer from my wheelchair. The drive to her place takes 15 minutes and neither of us talks much. What is there to say? My sister tried to destroy me and succeeded. When we get to Lucy's apartment, she helps me get settled in the spare room. Then she tells me she's calling her mom. I start to protest, but Lucy says her mom is a retired prosecutor, and if anyone can help figure out what to do with this evidence, it's her. Lucy makes the call right there in front of me. I hear her side of the conversation. She tells her mom she has a client who discovered something disturbing and needs legal advice. Her mom must ask what kind of disturbing because Lucy pauses and then says it's evidence of premeditated assault. She listens for a minute and then says yes. First thing in the morning would be perfect. Lucy hangs up and tells me her mom will be here at 7 with coffee and her legal brain. I should try to get some sleep. I don't think I can sleep, but I'm so tired my body feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds. Lucy helps me get ready for bed and leaves a glass of water on the nightstand. She tells me to call out if I need anything during the night. Her room is right across the hall. I lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Every time I close my eyes, I see that journal entry. Tomorrow changes everything. I'll be driving. She knew. She planned it. She looked at me that morning and smiled and insisted on driving because I looked tired. That whole drive, she knew what she was about to do. I must fall asleep eventually. Because the next thing I know, Lucy is gently shaking my shoulder and telling me it's 6:30. Her mom will be here in 30 minutes. Lucy helps me get ready and wheels me out to the kitchen where she's made toast and coffee. I can't eat, but I drink the coffee. At exactly 7 a.m., there's a knock on the door. Lucy answers it, and a woman in her 60s walks in carrying 2 more cups of coffee and a yellow legal pad. This is Virginia. She has sharp eyes that take everything in quickly. She looks at my exhausted face and shaking hands and doesn't waste time with pleasantries. She sits down at the kitchen table and asks me to start from the beginning. I tell her about the accident, about Amber's year of caregiving, about finding the journal yesterday. Virginia listens without interrupting, making notes on her legal pad. When I finish, she asks to see the journal and the photos. I show her everything. She reads through it methodically, taking her time, occasionally making more notes. The silence stretches out for almost 20 minutes while she reads. Finally, she looks up and says, "This is enough to reopen the accident investigation. If we can authenticate the journal and prove it's Amber's handwriting." Virginia explains that the original police report is going to work against us. It found no evidence of intentional action. It called the accident bad luck and wet roads. But the journal changes everything if we can prove it's real, and that Amber actually wrote these entries when they're dated. She says she knows a forensic document examiner who can analyze the handwriting and paper and ink. She also knows a detective who specializes in cold cases and won't dismiss this just because time has passed. Virginia warns me this won't be easy. Amber will claim the journal is fiction or that I'm misreading it. My family will take her side. The process could take months or years, but if I want to pursue this, she'll help me. I tell her I want to pursue it. Virginia nods and makes a call right there at the table. She talks to someone named Albert about examining a journal for authenticity. She listens and then says yes, this afternoon would work. She hangs up and tells me we have an appointment at 2. Then Virginia looks at me seriously and says, I need to act completely normal around Amber until we have a solid case. That means answering her daily check-in texts, pretending nothing has changed, not tipping her off that I found the journal. I feel sick at the thought of pretending everything is fine, but I understand why it's necessary. My phone buzzes with a text from Amber asking how I'm doing. Virginia watches me as I type out my response. I'm fine, just tired. Every word feels like swallowing glass, but I hit send. Amber responds immediately with a heart emoji and says she's glad I'm resting. She loves me so much I want to throw my phone across the room, but instead I set it down carefully on the table. Virginia says that's good. Keep doing exactly that. At 1:30, Lucy drives me to meet Albert McLaughlin. His office is in a converted house near downtown. He's a thin man in his 70s with careful hands and thick glasses. He photographs every page of the journal with professional equipment, taking multiple shots of each entry from different angles. Then he asks if I have samples of Amber's handwriting from before the accident. I remember the birthday cards and notes she sent me over the years. I kept them in a box in my closet. The same closet where I found her journal. Lucy offers to go get them, and I give her my apartment key. While we wait for Lucy to get back, Albert explains his process. He'll analyze the handwriting characteristics and compare them to the samples. He'll test the paper aging and ink oxidation to confirm the entries were written when they're dated. He'll look for any signs of forgery or backdating. The analysis will take about a week. Lucy returns with the box of cards and notes. I look at them spread out on Albert's desk. Birthday wishes and thank you notes and little messages of encouragement. Artifacts from when I thought my sister loved me. Albert photographs all of them too. He tells me he'll call as soon as he has results. His preliminary assessment is that the handwriting looks consistent throughout the journal and shows no obvious signs of forgery. But he needs to do the full analysis to be certain. We leave Albert's office and Lucy drives me back to her apartment. I'm exhausted, but my mind won't stop racing. Everything I thought I knew about the last year has been a lie. Amber didn't feel guilty about the accident. She felt triumphant. She got exactly what she wanted. The next morning, Virginia calls at 8 and says she set up a meeting with Detective Pope for 10. Lucy drives me to the police station downtown and wheels me through the accessible entrance. We wait in a small conference room with gray walls and fluorescent lights that buzz. Detective Pope walks in exactly at 10 carrying a thick folder. He's maybe mid-50s with gray hair and tired eyes. He shakes my hand and sits across from me without the fake sympathy I've gotten used to from doctors and therapists. I show him the journal copies and watch his face as he reads the entry from the day before the accident. He doesn't react much, but his jaw gets tight. He asks if I have the original, and I tell him yes, that Albert is analyzing it. He nods and keeps reading through more entries while I sit there feeling my heart pound against my ribs. After 20 minutes, he closes the folder and looks at me. He says attempted murder would be hard to prove this long after with no physical evidence from the scene. But assault with intent to cause serious injury might work if we can prove she planned it. He'll pull the original accident report and scene photos, review everything while we wait for the document analysis. I feel something loosen in my chest because he's not dismissing this. He's treating it like a real case. Lucy squeezes my shoulder as we leave, and I realize I'm shaking. Back at her apartment, I pull out my phone and start going through old texts and emails from before the accident. I search for Amber's name and find hundreds of messages. Most of them I barely remember. She'd text me constantly asking about my day and my plans, and especially about Luke. Where was he traveling? What projects was he working on? How was our relationship? At the time, I thought she was being caring and interested. Now I see her gathering information like she was studying us. She'd praise Luke constantly in the messages, saying how lucky I was, how amazing he was, how he deserved someone who really appreciated him. I find an email from 2 months before the accident where she asked detailed questions about his schedule and what routes he drove to work. I screenshot everything and send it to Detective Pope. My hands shake so hard I almost drop the phone twice. 3 days later, Tabitha calls to check on me like she does every few months. We chat about nothing for a while, and then I carefully bring up Amber. Ask if she remembers anything weird about how Amber acted before the accident. Tabitha goes quiet for a long moment. Then she admits something she's felt guilty about not telling me. Amber used to come to our office building and watch through the lobby windows. Tabitha saw her at least 5 or 6 times just standing there staring. She thought it was creepy but didn't want to cause family drama by mentioning it. My stomach twists because this is more proof of how obsessed Amber was. I thank Tabitha and tell her Detective Pope might call her. She says she'll tell him whatever he needs to know. A week after our first meeting, Detective Pope calls. He tracked down the other driver from the accident and interviewed him. The guy remembers that night clearly because it was so traumatic. He says Amber swerved directly into his path, not away from the intersection. He assumed it was panic or bad driving, but it stuck with him because it seemed wrong. His statement contradicts everything Amber claimed about trying to avoid him. Detective Pope says this is good evidence because it matches what the journal describes about her timing the swerve. I feel sick and relieved at the same time. Albert calls 2 days later and asks me to come to his office. Lucy drives me over and we find him waiting with his analysis report. He spent the week testing everything. The handwriting is definitely Amber's with consistent characteristics throughout. The paper aging and ink oxidation confirm the entries were written when they're dated. No evidence of forgery or backdating. He's willing to testify to all of this in court. I stare at the report feeling like I'm holding proof that my sister tried to kill or disable me. Virginia comes over that evening and sits down at Lucy's kitchen table with me. She spreads out all the evidence. The authenticated journal, the insurance policy, the witness statements, the accident reconstruction notes. She says we have enough to bring charges. But I need to understand this will be brutal. My family will have to pick sides. Amber will claim the journal is fiction, or that I'm twisting her words. The process could take years. There's no guarantee of conviction. She looks at me seriously and asks if I'm sure I want to do this. I tell her I'm sure because Amber didn't just hurt me in some accident. She planned it. She checked that intersection 3 times. She timed her swerve. She destroyed my life on purpose so she could take Luke. Then she spent a year pretending to care for me while getting exactly what she wanted. The engagement photos at the restaurant where Luke proposed to me keep flashing in my mind. I feel rage burning in my chest, hotter than anything I've felt since the accident. Virginia nods and says she'll contact the DA. 2 days later, Detective Pope brings in Tommy Kerr to review the accident evidence. Tommy is younger than I expected with sharp eyes that miss nothing. He spreads the scene photos across the table and studies them for over an hour. He measures angles and calculates speeds and draws diagrams. Finally, he looks up and explains that the damage patterns and final vehicle positions don't match Amber's story. If she'd swerved to avoid the intersection, the cars would have ended up differently. But the actual positions are consistent with her steering into the other car. The physics support what the journal says about her timing the impact. He's willing to write a full report and testify. I watch him pack up his materials and realize we're building a real case. This isn't just my word against Amber's anymore. We have proof. Detective Pope schedules my formal statement for the next morning at the police station downtown. Lucy drives me there and waits in the lobby while I wheel myself into a small interview room with Pope and another detective who operates the recording equipment. They explain everything will be documented and potentially used in court, so I need to be completely accurate and detailed. Pope starts with basic questions about my relationship with Amber before the accident. I describe how we grew up close, but she always seemed jealous of my career and relationship with Luke. I tell them about finding her at Luke's office building, something Tabitha witnessed, and how she asked constant questions about our relationship that felt invasive, but I dismissed as sisterly interest. The questions get harder when Pope asks about the night of the accident. I walk through every detail I remember. Amber insisting on driving, the rain, her hands on the wheel, the other car appearing, the impact on my side, waking up in the hospital paralyzed. Speaking it all out loud makes my stomach turn because I trusted her completely. That night, Pope asks about the year after when she moved in to care for me. I describe her routine of getting me ready each morning, driving me to therapy, making meals, sleeping on the couch. How she and Luke whispered in the kitchen about my care. How she stayed up waiting for his calls. How she slowly took over every part of my life while positioning herself closer to Luke. I have to pause twice to drink water because my throat gets tight talking about how she held me while I cried after Luke left, telling me he was weak and she'd never abandon me, all while planning to date him herself. The detective asks about finding the journal, and I describe cleaning the closet, the photo falling out, reading page after page of obsession with Luke, then the entry from the day before the accident with its cold calculation about the intersection and timing. Pope asks if I have any doubt the journal is real. I say no, because I know Amber's handwriting and Albert confirmed everything. The whole statement takes 3 hours, and by the end I feel sick and exhausted from reliving every moment of her betrayal. Pope thanks me and says the recording will go to the district attorney with all the other evidence. He warns me the DA will take about 2 weeks to review everything and decide whether to file charges. If they move forward, Amber will be notified immediately, and my family will find out what I've done. He looks at me seriously and says, I should prepare for serious fallout, because families rarely react well to these situations. I tell him I understand, and I'm ready for whatever happens. Lucy drives me back to her place because I can't face being alone. That night, I lie awake thinking about my parents finding out, about Amber being arrested, about everything exploding over the next 2 weeks. I focus on practical preparations. I meet with a disability benefits counselor Lucy recommends and apply for additional monthly support so I'm not dependent on anyone. I interview 3 home health aides and hire one named Margaret who can help me with daily tasks. I review my bank accounts and budget to make sure I can cover rent and expenses without help from Amber or my parents. Lucy helps me research accessible apartments in case I need to move quickly. Virginia checks in every few days to see how I'm holding up and reminds me this is the hardest part, the waiting and not knowing. I organize all my important documents and make sure I have copies of everything in case my parents try to interfere with my medical care or finances. I change my emergency contacts from family to Lucy and Virginia. I update my will. I prepare for war because I know that's what's coming. On day 13, Detective Pope calls and asks me to come to his office. Lucy drives me over and we find him waiting with news. The district attorney reviewed everything and agreed to file charges. They're charging Amber with second-degree assault based on the journal evidence, the witness statements contradicting her story, and the accident reconstruction showing her swerve pattern matches. What she wrote about planning, Pope says the DA considered attempted murder, but felt assault was more likely to result in conviction given the time that's passed. I feel this weird mix of relief that someone believes me and terror about what happens next. Pope explains Amber will be arrested within 48 hours, and my family will be notified as part of the process. He's already arranged for patrol cars to monitor my building in case anyone tries to confront me. Virginia filed paperwork for a protective order that will go into effect as soon as the arrest happens. I thank Pope and leave his office feeling like I just set off a bomb that's going to destroy what's left of my family. The next morning is Tuesday, and I'm at Lucy's apartment when my phone starts ringing at 9:30. It's my mother. I almost don't answer, but I know I have to face this. Her voice comes through the speaker screaming so loud I have to hold the phone away from my ear. She's saying I'm destroying the family over a misunderstanding, that Amber would never hurt me on purpose, that I'm being vindictive because I'm jealous she found happiness with Luke. She calls me cruel and selfish and says I'm punishing Amber for falling in love. I try to explain about the journal and the evidence, but she talks over me saying I'm twisting everything to fit my paranoid conspiracy. She says the accident was investigated thoroughly and found to be exactly what it looked like, just bad luck and wet roads. She's sobbing now, saying I'm tearing the family apart because I can't accept that sometimes terrible things just happen without anyone being to blame. I tell her the evidence proves Amber planned it and she screams that I'm sick and need psychiatric help. Then she hangs up. 20 minutes later, my father calls. His voice is quieter but just as angry. He says I'm ruining Amber's life over a creative writing journal that doesn't prove anything. He insists she wrote those entries as fiction, maybe for a class or just as a way to process her feelings. He says I'm inventing an elaborate conspiracy because I can't handle that bad things sometimes happen to good people. He tells me Amber has been racked with guilt for a year, that she gave up everything to take care of me, that she doesn't deserve this persecution. I try to tell him about the insurance policy and the internet searches, but he says I'm grasping at straws. He says if I go through with this, I'm no longer his daughter. Then he hangs up too. An hour later, Luke sends me a long text message. He calls me cruel and delusional, and says Amber has suffered enough guilt over the accident without me making up stories about premeditation. He says I'm trying to destroy their happiness because I can't move on with my own life. He claims my bitterness is poisoning me from the inside, and I'm becoming someone he doesn't recognize. He says the journal is clearly fiction, and I'm twisting her words because I'm mentally unstable from my injuries. He ends by saying he hopes I get the help I need and that he's blocking my number so I can't harass them anymore. I sit there staring at the messages, feeling completely alone. I block my parents' numbers and Luke's and all their social media accounts, but the messages keep coming. My aunt calls saying I'm being cruel. My cousin sends an email about family loyalty. Distant relatives I haven't talked to in years suddenly have opinions about my mental state. Everyone thinks I've lost my mind with grief and jealousy. They think I'm making up elaborate stories to cope with losing my ability to walk and my fiancé. No one believes me except Lucy and Virginia and Detective Pope. That afternoon, my father shows up at my apartment building. The manager calls me and says there's a man outside screaming my name and making threats. I call the police, and they arrive to find him yelling that I'm tearing the family apart over lies, that I'm going to regret destroying Amber's life. They escort him away, but he's still shouting as they put him in the patrol car. Virginia immediately files a restraining order against my parents and Luke. The next day, Amber posts bail, and within hours, her social media fills with tearful videos. She talks directly to the camera with red eyes and a shaking voice. She says I've falsely accused her to punish her for finding love with Luke. She claims the journal was creative writing for a fiction class she took years ago. She says I'm twisting her words because I'm mentally unstable from my injuries, and can't accept that the accident was just a tragic random event. She posts old photos of us together with captions about how much she loves me and how heartbroken she is that I'm doing this. Her friends share the videos calling me vindictive and cruel. Luke posts his support saying she's the strongest person he knows. My parents share everything saying their oldest daughter has lost touch with reality. I watch it all from Lucy's couch feeling the whole world turn against me while Amber plays the victim perfectly. Detective Pope calls me the next morning while I'm still at Lucy's apartment. He says Amber's lawyer is building a defense around the journal, being fiction, creative writing she did for some class, or just personal venting that doesn't prove actual intent. He explains the case will come down to whether 12 random people believe the journal is a confession or just angry thoughts she never planned to act on, and Amber's year of devoted caregiving is going to work heavily in her favor. Juries love redemption stories and devoted sisters, he warns, and Amber's lawyer will paint her as the ultimate caregiver who sacrificed everything only to be accused by a bitter, jealous woman who can't accept that accidents happen. I hang up feeling sick because I know he's right. That night, I fall asleep on Lucy's couch and the nightmares start. I dream about the accident, but now I see it differently. Like watching a movie where someone pointed out all the clues you missed the first time I see Amber's hands on the steering wheel, turning deliberately toward the other car instead of away. I see her eyes in the rearview mirror, calm and focused, calculating the exact moment to swerve. I see her face as we're about to hit, completely blank and emotionless, and then the instant after impact she shifts to panic and horror like flipping a switch. I wake up sweating and shaking, and Lucy finds me crying in the dark. She sits with me until morning and then makes calls to find me help. Lucy finds a therapist named Dr. Mitchell who works with assault victims, and when I first hear that word, I want to argue that I wasn't assaulted, I was in an accident. But Dr. Mitchell explains during our first session that what Amber did was assault, a planned attack that left me permanently disabled, and the fact that she's my sister and pretended to care for me afterward makes the betrayal even worse. She says this kind of intimate betrayal from family causes a specific type of trauma that's incredibly hard to heal from, because it destroys your ability to trust your own judgment about the people closest to you. I start seeing her twice a week and slowly begin processing that my sister tried to kill or disable me, then spent a year playing devoted caregiver while stealing my life piece by piece. Detective Pope calls again a week later with better news. Tabitha agreed to testify about Amber's behavior before the accident, and after he interviewed her, 2 other people from my old office came forward with similar stories. They remember Amber showing up at company events she wasn't invited to, always positioning herself near Luke. They remember her asking weird questions about his schedule and his relationship with me, whether we were happy, whether I appreciated him. One woman says Amber once asked her if she thought Luke seemed satisfied with me, or if he seemed like he might want someone more attentive. They thought it was odd at the time but didn't say anything because she was my sister, and they figured she was just protective. Now they realize she was stalking him and gathering information to use later. The preliminary hearing happens 6 weeks after Amber's arrest on a cold Thursday morning in February, Virginia, wheels me into the courtroom and positions my chair at the prosecutor's table. Amber sits across the aisle in a gray dress that makes her look small and scared. Her lawyer is a sharp woman in an expensive suit who immediately starts arguing that the journal is fiction, and the accident reconstruction is just speculation based on old photos. She says the prosecution has no physical evidence of intent, no witnesses to premeditation, nothing but the vengeful accusations of a woman who can't accept that her sister found happiness with her ex-fiancé. Then Amber takes the stand and cries while talking about how devoted she was to my care. She describes waking up at 3 a.m. to help me use the bathroom, giving up her social life to drive me to endless medical appointments, working double shifts to pay my rent after Luke left. She says she fell in love with Luke while they were both grieving my injuries, that it happened naturally and neither of them wanted it. Her voice breaks when she says I'm repaying her love and sacrifice with false accusations because I'm bitter and can't move on. She looks directly at me with tears streaming down her face, and I want to scream that it's all an act, that she planned everything. But Virginia squeezes my shoulder and reminds me to stay quiet. The judge listens to both sides for 3 hours and then announces he's finding sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. He denies the defense's motion to dismiss based on the journal authentication, the accident reconstruction showing inconsistencies with Amber's original statement, and the witness testimony about her pre-accident behavior. Amber's lawyer looks furious and starts arguing, but the judge cuts her off. That's when I see Amber's face change. She stops crying instantly and stares at me across the courtroom with an expression I've never seen before. Cold and hard and calculating. Nothing like the guilty sister who sobbed at my hospital bedside. For just a few seconds, the mask drops completely, and I see the real Amber, the one who planned my accident and played devoted caregiver for a year. Then she blinks and the tears start again, and she buries her face in her lawyer's shoulder. That night I can't sleep because I keep seeing that cold expression, and suddenly everything makes sense. Moving in with me and Luke wasn't guilt, it was strategy. She needed unlimited access to him and she needed to look like a saint, so nobody would ever suspect the truth. Every meal she cooked, every therapy appointment she drove me to, every time she helped me shower or use the bathroom, she was building her cover story while systematically taking over my relationship. She positioned herself as the understanding confidant when Luke started pulling away. She was always there when he needed someone to talk to about how hard my care was. She made herself indispensable to both of us, and everyone praised her sacrifice while she got exactly what she wanted. My parents release a statement to the local news the day after the hearing. I see it on my phone while Lucy drives me home from therapy. They call me a troubled person who needs psychiatric help and claim I've always been jealous of Amber. They say my injuries have made me paranoid, and that I'm twisting innocent journal entries into evidence of a crime that never happened. They describe Amber as a devoted sister who gave up everything to care for me, and insist that anyone who knows her would never believe she's capable of deliberately hurting someone. The news runs the story with a headline about sisters torn apart by tragedy and accident accusations. Virginia calls me after seeing the statement and says we need to prepare for trial immediately. She comes to my apartment that evening with a stack of files and warns me that testifying will be brutal, because Amber's lawyer will try to paint me as bitter and unstable. She coaches me on staying calm and factual no matter what they ask. We practice for hours with her throwing hostile questions at me about my relationship with Amber before the accident, my mental state after my injuries, whether I'm just angry that Luke chose her. She teaches me to pause before answering, to stick to facts without getting emotional, to look at the jury instead of Amber when I speak. She says the defense will try to provoke me into an outburst that makes me look unhinged, and I can't give them that. 3 months after the charges were filed, Detective Pope calls with news that changes everything again. He found a life insurance policy during a financial records search, taken out by Amber on my life 2 weeks before the accident. The beneficiary is Amber, and the policy amount is $500,000. He says this is huge because there's no innocent reason for her to insure my life right before the accident, especially for that amount when I had no dependents and she had no financial stake in my survival. It's another piece of evidence showing she planned this, that she stood to gain financially, whether I died or just ended up disabled and dependent on her care. I sit in my wheelchair staring at my phone after he hangs up, thinking about how Amber must have filled out that policy application, knowing exactly what she was about to do. Virginia calls an emergency meeting with the DA the next morning, and I wheel myself into the prosecutor's office with the insurance policy documents clutched in my lap. The DA is a tired-looking woman named Sarah Mitchell, who listens while Virginia walks through the timeline of the policy purchase, the accident date, and the beneficiary amount. She asks me direct questions about whether Amber ever mentioned life insurance or expressed concern about my safety before the accident, and I tell her no, never, not once in all the years we were sisters. The DA pulls up the original case file on her computer and reads through the assault charges, then looks at Virginia and says the insurance policy changes everything, because it shows financial motive on top of the emotional obsession with Luke. She says they're amending the charges to attempted murder in the first degree with special circumstances, which carries a potential life sentence if convicted. I feel something shift in my chest when she says those words because attempted murder sounds so much more real than assault, so much closer to what Amber actually did when she steered us into that intersection. The arraignment on the new charges happens 3 days later, and Amber's lawyer stands up looking angry and defensive. He argues that Amber took out the policy because she was worried about me working 12-hour days in a stressful job and wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of if something happened. He says lots of siblings have life insurance on each other and the timing is just bad luck, not evidence of criminal intent. Virginia stands and responds that the policy amount is $500,000, far beyond what would be needed for funeral expenses or basic care, and that Amber was working as a waitress making barely above minimum wage when she somehow found the money for premium payments on a policy that size. She points out that Amber took out the policy exactly 2 weeks before the accident, after writing detailed journal entries about planning the crash, and that no reasonable person would see this as coincidence. The judge agrees the insurance policy combined with the journal entries and accident reconstruction creates sufficient evidence for attempted murder charges and denies the defense motion to reduce the charges back to assault. Detective Pope calls me a week after the hearing with more information that makes my stomach hurt. He says his tech team pulled Amber's internet search history from her laptop and found she'd been researching the intersection where the accident happened for at least 6 weeks before that night. She looked up traffic camera locations in the area and found that particular intersection had a blind spot, where the stop sign was barely visible from certain angles. She searched for weather patterns and rain forecasts for that specific week. She looked up spinal cord injury outcomes and paralysis statistics, including detailed medical articles about what level of spine damage causes what type of disability. Detective Pope says she even searched for information about how long it takes someone with a T6 injury to regain independence and whether they'd need full-time care. He tells me this proves she wasn't shocked by my injuries like she claimed, because she researched the exact outcomes she was trying to cause. I sit in my wheelchair staring at my phone after he hangs up, thinking about Amber reading medical articles about paralysis and deciding that destroying my spine was an acceptable price for getting Luke. Luke calls Detective Pope 2 weeks later, and I find out about it when the detective contacts me to say Luke wants to give a statement. Detective Pope says Luke found old text messages on a phone he'd stopped using before the accident. Messages from Amber that he never saw because they went to an account he rarely checked. The messages talk about how perfect Luke and Amber would be together, and how I didn't appreciate what I had with him. She wrote about how Luke deserved someone who would put him first instead of working all the time. Someone who would make him the center of their world the way she would. Detective Pope says Luke sounded shaken on the phone, like he was finally understanding that he wasn't some guy who fell in love during a tragedy, but a target that Amber had been hunting for months before the accident. I agree to let Luke give his statement because even though I hate him for leaving me and dating my sister, his testimony about Amber's behavior might help the case. Luke meets with Detective Pope and Virginia at the prosecutor's office, and they record his full statement over 3 hours. Virginia calls me afterward and says Luke admitted that Amber actively encouraged him to pull away from me during my recovery. He says she would make comments about how hard my care was and how nobody would blame him for needing space. She positioned herself as the understanding person who shared his burden and never judged him for struggling with my disability. She'd suggest he take work trips when I had hard therapy days, tell him I'd be fine with just her there, make it easy for him to avoid the difficult parts of my care. Luke says he thought she was just being supportive and giving him permission to take care of himself, but now he sees how she manipulated every interaction to drive a wedge between us. Virginia says Luke broke down during the statement and admitted he feels like he was groomed by Amber, the same way she groomed the accident, that every kind gesture and understanding word was calculated to get him exactly where she wanted him. His testimony will be powerful at trial, because it shows the manipulation didn't start after the accident, but was part of Amber's plan all along. My mother calls me the day after Luke gives his statement, and I answer thinking, maybe she's finally ready to believe the truth. Instead, she screams at me that Luke is lying to save his own reputation, that he's turning on Amber because he knows people think he's a bad person for dating his ex's sister. She says Luke is weak and selfish and making up stories about manipulation, because he can't admit he fell in love honestly. My father gets on the phone and tells me they've hired a lawyer for Amber using their retirement savings, that they're going to fight these charges with everything they have. He says I'm dead to them, that they have one daughter now and she's the one sitting in jail because of my lies. He says they've told the extended family not to contact me, that I'm no longer part of the family, and they don't want my poison spreading to anyone else. I try to tell them about the insurance policy and the internet searches, but my mother starts sobbing and my father hangs up. I sit holding my phone thinking about how Amber didn't just take my legs and my fiancé, she took my entire family because they'd rather believe I'm crazy than accept what their youngest daughter really is. The trial date gets set for early September, 5 months after Amber's arrest on the attempted murder charges. Virginia comes to my apartment and sits across from me at the kitchen table with her legal files spread out between us. She tells me we have strong evidence, but juries are hard to predict, especially in cases where family members are involved. She says some people won't be able to believe that a sister would plan something this calculated and then spend a year playing devoted caretaker. They'll look at Amber crying on the stand and think there must be some other explanation, that maybe the journal was fantasy or the insurance policy was coincidence, or the accident really was just bad luck that I'm twisting into a conspiracy. Virginia says we need to be prepared for the possibility that even with all our evidence, the jury might not convict, and I need to decide now if I can live with that outcome. She asks me if I want to consider a plea deal, if the defense offers one, if guaranteed consequences might be better than risking a trial that could end in acquittal. I tell her I want to go to trial because I need 12 strangers to hear what Amber did and choose to believe me, even if my own parents won't. I spend the next few weeks going through every memory I have of Amber from before the accident, trying to find signs I missed of her obsession and capacity for violence. I remember her asking detailed questions about my relationship with Luke, wanting to know how we met and what made him special, and whether I ever worried about losing him. I remember her showing up at places where she knew Luke would be, always with some excuse about being in the neighborhood or meeting a friend nearby. I remember small moments of jealousy when I talked about my job or my apartment or my plans with Luke, little flashes of something bitter in her expression that disappeared so fast I thought I imagined them. But nothing prepared me for the truth that she was willing to destroy my life to take what she wanted, that she could plan my paralysis like someone planning a vacation, and then cry at my hospital bedside like her heart was breaking. I tell my therapist about reviewing these memories and she says, traumatic betrayal rewrites your entire history because you can't trust any moment that came before, can't know which interactions were real and which were Amber calculating her next move. Lucy comes with me to every medical appointment and therapy session during the pretrial period, and Virginia works endless hours building the strongest case possible. They're the only people who believe me completely without questioning my sanity or suggesting I might be misinterpreting the evidence. Lucy holds my hand during panic attacks when I wake up from nightmares about the accident, and Virginia calls me every few days to update me on case developments and remind me we're going to get through this. They've become my anchors in a world where my family thinks I'm delusional, and my ex-fiancé is testifying about being manipulated by the sister who paralyzed me. I realize these two women have given me more genuine support in 6 months than my parents gave me in the entire year after the accident, and that the family I'm building now is stronger than the one that abandoned me. 2 weeks before the trial date, Amber's lawyer contacts Virginia about a plea deal. He says Amber will plead guilty to second-degree assault in exchange for a sentence of 3 to 5 years with possibility of parole. Virginia brings me the offer and lays out the options while I sit in my wheelchair trying to process what this means. She explains that a plea deal guarantees Amber faces some consequences and admits guilt, but assault doesn't reflect the premeditation and planning that attempted murder charges recognize. She says if we go to trial and win, Amber could get life in prison. But if we lose, she walks away free, and I get nothing. The plea deal is the safe choice that ensures Amber serves time, but it also means letting her minimize what she did and get out in a few years to live the life she stole from me. Virginia tells me this is my decision, and she'll support whatever I choose, but I need to understand the risks of both options. I look at her across the table and say, I'm rejecting the plea deal, Because I want a jury to hear the full truth about what Amber planned and executed, and I'm willing to risk everything for the chance that 12 people will see her for what she really is. Virginia looks across the table at me and nods slowly. She tells me she respects my choice and warns me again that juries are unpredictable, but she'll build the strongest case possible. Over the next 2 weeks, she works around the clock preparing exhibits, coaching witnesses, and running through cross-examination scenarios with me until I can recite my testimony without breaking down. Lucy stays with me most nights because I can't sleep, my mind racing through everything that could go wrong at trial. The morning of March 15th arrives cold and gray, 18 months after the accident that destroyed my life. I dress carefully in the outfit Virginia helped me pick, professional but not too formal, wanting the jury to see me as a real person and not just a victim. Lucy drives me to the courthouse and helps me navigate the accessible entrance while reporters shout questions I ignore. The courtroom is smaller than I expected. Wood paneling and fluorescent lights that make everything look washed out. I wheel myself to the prosecution table next to Virginia, and that's when I see Amber across the aisle for the first time since I found her journal. She's wearing a blue dress that makes her look young and innocent, her hair pulled back, no makeup except for mascara that's already smudged like she's been crying. Our eyes meet for just a second and her face goes blank. No emotion at all. Nothing like the sobbing sister who held me in the hospital. The judge enters and everyone stands except me, and I feel that familiar shame about my wheelchair before I remember why we're here. Virginia's opening statement lays out the evidence piece by piece. The journal entries, the insurance policy, the internet searches, the impossible physics of Amber's claimed swerve. Amber's lawyer counters that the journal is fiction, that the insurance was innocent protection, that my grief has twisted me into someone who sees conspiracy instead of accepting that accidents happen. The prosecution calls Tommy first, and he walks the jury through his accident reconstruction with diagrams and photos. He explains how Amber's claimed defensive swerve would have taken the car away from the other driver, not into him, and how the damage patterns show she steered directly into the impact zone. Amber's lawyer tries to confuse him with technical questions, but Tommy stays calm and clear, making it simple enough that anyone can understand. Tabitha testifies next, about Amber showing up at our office building, watching Luke through the windows, asking constant questions about our relationship. She describes finding Amber in the parking garage once, sitting in her car outside Luke's usual spot, and how creepy it felt even before the accident. Albert takes the stand after lunch and explains his forensic analysis in detail, how he verified the journal's authenticity through paper aging, ink oxidation, and handwriting comparison. He shows the jury samples of Amber's writing from before the accident, pointing out distinctive letter formations and pressure patterns that match the journal entries exactly. Amber's lawyer suggests the journal could be recent forgeries using old paper, but Albert shoots that down with scientific certainty that makes the lawyer look foolish. Then Virginia calls Luke, and I watch him walk to the witness stand looking 10 years older than the man who left me. His voice shakes when he describes how Amber encouraged him to pull back from me during my recovery, always with sympathetic words about how hard this must be for him, and how he deserved support too. He admits he was too blind and selfish to see what she was doing, how she positioned herself as the understanding friend who shared his burden while driving a wedge between us. He talks about finding the old text messages from before the accident, where Amber told him I didn't appreciate him, and how perfect they'd be together. Messages he'd deleted and forgotten until Detective Pope recovered them. Amber's lawyer tries to paint him as a bitter ex trying to save his reputation, but Luke's obvious shame and regret make him believable. The judge calls a recess, and Virginia tells me I'm doing great just by staying composed, that the jury is watching how I react to everything. Day 3 starts with my testimony, and I wheel myself to the witness stand feeling like I might throw up. Virginia walks me through my relationship with Amber before the accident, the little moments of jealousy I dismissed, her obsession with Luke that I thought was just sisterly interest. I described the accident in detail, what Amber said afterward, how she cried and apologized and moved in to take care of me. I tell them about the year of caregiving, how devoted she seemed, how she took over my life while I was grateful for her sacrifice. Then I describe finding the journal, reading those entries, understanding that everything was planned. Amber's lawyer cross-examines me for 3 hours, asking if I'm jealous of Amber's relationship with Luke, if my pain medication affects my mental state, if I've ever been treated for paranoid thoughts. Virginia prepared me for this, and I stay calm, answering each question with facts instead of emotion. I explain that I'm not jealous. I'm angry that my sister deliberately paralyzed me, and there's a difference. The lawyer holds up the journal entry about the intersection and asks if I'm sure it's not just creative writing, a fictional scenario. Amber imagined I look directly at the jury and tell them that nobody writes detailed plans to paralyze their sister as fiction, and nobody takes out a life insurance policy on someone as research for a story. On day 4, Amber takes the stand and cries through her entire testimony. She insists the journal was fiction, practice for a creative writing class she was thinking about taking, that she never meant any of it. She claims the insurance policy was because she worried about me working such long hours, that she wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of if something happened. She talks about her devotion to my care after the accident, the sacrifices she made, how much she loved me and still loves me despite everything. She describes her relationship with Luke, as something that grew naturally from shared trauma, that they both felt guilty about falling for each other but couldn't help their feelings. Her lawyer asks if she deliberately caused the accident, and she looks right at the jury with tears streaming down her face and says no, she would never hurt me. The accident was the worst moment of her life. Virginia's cross-examination is brutal and precise. She walks Amber through every journal entry, asking her to explain each one as fiction, and the explanations sound weaker and weaker. She brings up the life insurance policy and asks why Amber never mentioned it to me or anyone else if it was innocent protection. She shows Amber the internet search history about spinal cord injuries and asks why she was researching paralysis outcomes before the accident if she didn't plan to cause one. Amber's answers get more desperate and contradictory until finally she just keeps repeating that she didn't do it. She didn't mean it. Everyone is twisting her words. The jury gets the case on Friday afternoon, and Virginia warns me it could take days for them to reach a verdict. I go back to Lucy's apartment and try to function like a normal person, but I can't eat or sleep or think about anything except those 12 people deciding if they believe me. Lucy tries to distract me with movies and cooking, but I just stare at my phone waiting for Virginia's call. Saturday passes in a fog of anxiety. Sunday I attend a disability support group meeting and try to focus on other people's problems, but my mind keeps drifting back to the jury room. Monday morning Virginia calls and tells me the jury has reached a verdict. We need to get to the courthouse immediately. My hands shake so badly Lucy has to help me get dressed. The courtroom fills up fast, reporters and curious observers packing the gallery. Amber sits at the defense table looking pale and small, her parents behind her holding hands. My parents are there too, glaring at me like I'm the one who committed a crime. The judge enters and asks the jury foreman if they've reached a verdict. He stands up, an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, and says they have. The judge asks him to read it, and my heart pounds so hard I think everyone can hear it. Guilty on all counts, including attempted murder. Amber's face crumbles and she makes a sound like a wounded animal. Her lawyer puts his hand on her shoulder while she sobs. My parents rush from the courtroom and I can hear my mother wailing in the hallway. I feel nothing except a cold satisfaction that 12 strangers believed me when my own family wouldn't. Virginia squeezes my hand and whispers that justice was served. But I'm still numb, still processing that it's really over. 2 weeks later, I'm back in the same courtroom for sentencing. Virginia helped me write a victim impact statement, and I practiced it over and over until I could get through it without crying. When the judge calls on me, I wheel myself to the front and read from the paper in my shaking hands. I tell the court that Amber didn't just take my ability to walk. She stole my fiancé, my family, and my sense of safety in the world. I explain that I can never trust anyone the same way again, that I look at every helpful gesture and wonder what people really want from me. I describe the daily reality of paralysis, the catheters and pressure sores and constant pain, knowing that my sister chose this for me because she wanted my boyfriend. When I finish, the judge thanks me and asks if Amber wants to make a statement. She stands up crying and insists she's innocent, that she never meant to hurt me, that everyone has made a terrible mistake. The judge cuts her off and says the jury has spoken, and the evidence was overwhelming. He sentences her to 15 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 10 years. Guards lead Amber away in handcuffs while she screams that she didn't do it, and I watch her disappear through the side door feeling like I can finally breathe again. That night, I get an email from my parents' lawyer with a formal message. They're disowning me and will never forgive me for putting their youngest daughter in prison. They don't want any contact with me ever again, and I should consider myself no longer part of the family. I read it twice, then delete it without responding. I already grieved the loss of my family during the trial, already accepted that they chose Amber over truth and me over justice. Lucy and Virginia are my family now, the people who believed me when it mattered, and that's enough. 3 weeks after the sentencing, Luke sends me a text asking if we can meet to talk. I stare at the message for 2 days before responding that I'll see him once at a coffee shop near my apartment. Lucy offers to come with me, but I tell her I need to do this alone. I arrive 15 minutes early and position my wheelchair at a corner table where I can see the door. Luke walks in looking thinner than I remember, dark circles under his eyes and wearing a wrinkled shirt like he forgot to care about his appearance. He sits down across from me and immediately starts crying, apologizing over and over for being blind and weak, and letting Amber manipulate him into abandoning me. He explains how she slowly convinced him I'd be better off without him, how she made herself indispensable while painting me as increasingly depressed and difficult, how she isolated him from mutual friends who might have questioned what was happening. I listen without interrupting as he describes the guilt that's been eating him alive since he testified, how he can't sleep knowing he left me when I needed him most, and fell for the person who deliberately destroyed my life. When he finally stops talking, I take a breath and tell him I forgive him for being manipulated because Amber was calculating and patient and good at what she did, but I also tell him we can never have any kind of relationship again, not friendship or contact or anything, because too much has been broken between us, and I need to move forward without reminders of what she took. He nods and wipes his eyes, saying he understands and that he's moving to another state next month to start over somewhere. Nobody knows what happened. He hopes I find peace and happiness despite everything Amber stole from me, and I tell him I hope he finds the same, before wheeling myself out of the coffee shop without looking back. Virginia calls me the next week about filing a civil lawsuit against Amber for my ongoing medical costs and the financial losses from the accident. We spend hours going through bills and calculating expenses, everything from the initial hospital stay to adaptive equipment to lost wages from the job I had to quit. The lawsuit takes 8 months to work through the courts, but we eventually win a judgment of over $2 million that will be paid from any money Amber earns after she's released from prison, and any assets she manages to acquire. Virginia warns me I'll probably never see most of the money since Amber will likely work minimum wage jobs and hide income, but having the judgment on record feels like another form of justice and ensures she can't profit from her crime through book deals or media appearances. During the lawsuit process, I get contacted by a disability rights organization, asking if I'd be willing to speak at their annual conference about my experience. I'm terrified at first, but Lucy encourages me to share my story, saying it could help other people recognize manipulation and abuse by caregivers. I write and rewrite my speech a dozen times, focusing on how people with disabilities are vulnerable to those who control their daily care, and how important it is to maintain outside relationships and support systems. The first time I present to a room of 200 people, my hands shake so badly I can barely hold my notes. But afterwards, 3 people come up to tell me my story, help them understand their own situations. I start speaking at more events, refining my message and connecting with advocacy groups, and slowly I find purpose in the trauma by helping others avoid what happened to me. Lucy and I are having coffee one morning when she mentions how many people have asked her for recommendations about navigating the healthcare system after new disabilities. We start talking about how confusing and overwhelming everything was for me in the beginning, how hard it was to find trustworthy support services and understand insurance coverage and locate accessible housing. Within a month, we've drafted a business plan for a consulting service, helping people with new disabilities and their families figure out the practical aspects of their changed lives. We start small, working with clients in the evenings and weekends, but within 6 months, we're busy enough that Lucy cuts back her physical therapy hours and I'm working full-time from home. Using my experience to help others creates meaning from the pain and gives me back some of the control I lost when Amber destroyed my body. 6 months after the trial, I realize I need to leave this city where everything reminds me of Amber and Luke and the life I lost. I spend weeks researching accessible housing in different places before finding an apartment in a city 3 states away with a vibrant downtown and active disability community. The apartment is on the ground floor of a renovated building with wide doorways and a roll-in shower, and the neighborhood has accessible shops and restaurants and public transportation. Moving is exhausting and scary, but also exciting, like I'm finally building a life that's entirely mine instead of living in the shadow of what was taken. I don't tell my parents I'm leaving because we haven't spoken since they disowned me, and I don't tell Luke because he's not part of my life anymore. I just pack up my things and drive away with Lucy, helping me load the moving truck and promising to visit every few months. My new therapist is recommended by the local disability center, and she specializes in trauma and grief. We spend sessions processing the complicated reality of losing my mobility, my family, and my sister all at the same time, mourning multiple losses that happened in layers over 2 years. She helps me understand that healing isn't a straight line, and that some days I'll still feel the rage and betrayal as sharply as the day I found Amber's journal, but those days are becoming less frequent as I build new experiences and relationships. She teaches me techniques for managing the anger when it surfaces, and reminds me that feeling it doesn't mean I'm not healing, it just means I'm human. And what happened to me was genuinely terrible. I start reaching out to old friends who disappeared after the accident, people I worked with or went to college with who stopped calling when I got hurt. Some of them don't respond, but others apologize for not staying in touch, admitting they didn't know how to handle my disability or what to say to me. A few of them become part of my support system again, learning about wheelchair accessibility and asking questions instead of making assumptions. We meet for dinners and movies and game nights, and slowly I remember what it feels like to have friends who knew me before everything changed, and still want to know me now. 1 year after the trial, I'm sitting in my apartment looking around at the life I've built, and realizing I'm genuinely happy for the first time since before the accident. I have meaningful work helping other people with disabilities through the consulting business, a community of friends who show up for me in ways that matter, and a sense of peace I never expected to find after everything that happened. I've started dating someone I met through the disability advocacy community, another wheelchair user who sees me as a whole person instead of a victim or an inspiration or a tragedy. We're taking things slow, but there's something real growing between us, something based on who we actually are instead of who we used to be or might have been. I realize Amber took my legs and my old life and my family and my fiancé, but she couldn't take my strength or my ability to create a future worth living. She tried to destroy me to get what she wanted, and instead she freed me to become someone stronger than I was before, someone who survived her betrayal and built something real from the wreckage. The life I have now looks nothing like what I imagined before the accident, but it's mine, and it's full of people who genuinely love me and work that gives me purpose, and that's more than enough. 2 years after I found the journal, I invite Lucy and Virginia to my apartment for what I call a burning. I've kept the journal locked in a fireproof box since the trial ended, not sure what to do with it now that Amber is in prison and the case is closed. We go to the small patio behind my building where there's a metal fire pit the landlord lets residents use. I wheel myself close enough to feel the heat as Lucy helps me tear out the pages one by one and drop them into the flames. The paper curls and blackens, the ink bubbling and disappearing as the words that destroyed my life turn into ash. Virginia stands beside me with her hand on my shoulder, and Lucy keeps feeding pages into the fire until the journal is completely gone. The smoke rises and blows away on the wind, carrying the last physical evidence of Amber's betrayal with it. I watch the ash scatter and realize I'm not crying or shaking or feeling the rage that used to consume me when I thought about what she did. I just feel tired and ready to let it go. After the fire burns down, we sit on the patio drinking coffee and talking about other things. Normal things like Lucy's new relationship and Virginia's volunteer work at the legal clinic. Nobody mentions Amber or the trial or the accident. We just exist together in the present, and that feels like its own kind of freedom. I've been thinking about writing a book about everything that happened, not for revenge or attention, but to help other people recognize manipulative relationships before it's too late. Especially relationships within families where abuse gets hidden behind words like love and care and devotion. I want people to understand that disability makes you vulnerable in ways that aren't obvious, that caregivers have power that can be used for harm, that sometimes the people who seem most devoted are the ones destroying you from the inside. My life looks nothing like what I imagined before the accident. I don't have the career I worked for, or the family I grew up with, or the future I planned, but I have Lucy and Virginia and the other friends I've made through the disability community. I have work that matters and helps people who are going through what I survived. I have a small apartment that's mine, and a life that's real and full of people who genuinely love me without conditions or hidden plans. And somehow, after everything Amber took and everything I lost, that's more than enough.